Hi there, I'm Seth Roback, and today I wanted to discuss the astrological aspect of the Inconjunct or Quincunx. An aspect is a relationship between two planets that are separated by a certain number of degrees. And if you're familiar with aspects, you know the common major ones are the conjunctions, squares, trines, sextiles, oppositions. The inconjunct is a more of an unusual one, and so we're going to discuss it. I have a chart here that has some good examples of it. In this case, it's a double quincunx or inconjunct, which creates a yod configuration. So I'm just going to show you on the chart wheel here, if you can see my mark here, I'm circling where there is a conjunction between the moon and Saturn. And then if you see Neptune down here, they're connected by this green line. So oh, here it is, it's a little bit bigger. Okay. So that right there is approximately 150 degrees. If you look at Saturn on the aspect grid, I'm touching it right here, and Neptune, where they intersect, it has this funny symbol right here that kind of looks like a sawhorse. You see, I could probably get bigger. Right there, you see it. It's a 0 degree orb between Saturn and Neptune. It's a quincunx, or a inconjunct. So what does that mean? What is a inconjunct? I kind of see it as a aspect that is kind of a cockeyed aspect, because we're familiar. If you're familiar with oppositions, that's planets that are or whatever that are directly opposite on the other side of the wheel of a planet, and usually the characteristics of those are kind of push and pull. You think of like opposites attract and repel each other. And you see that with sun signs. For example, I'm a Cancer, so I might have an attraction and a repulsion towards Capricorn, which is on the other side. You see Cancer sign here, and on the opposite is Capricorn. But they share a certain commonality between each other that kind of draw each other and sort of repel each other. Capricorns are very social status, and career oriented. Cancers tend to be more personal, home, and emotional oriented. But there's a certain attraction there. However, when you take a Cancer sign and you look at Aquarius or Sagittarius here, that are not directly opposite but are neighbors to Capricorn, it's sort of a more unusual relationship. Let's just go briefly through the other aspects, and you see how kind of an unusual, in that context, you'll see how kind of unusual the inconjunct is. For example, if you were to look at the Cancer, which I'm circling here, and Pisces and Scorpio, notice they're all blue. Those are trine to each other, and so they all share the same element of water. They're different modes. Cancer is fixed water. Cancer is cardinal water. Scorpio is fixed water, and what is that? Let's see. And Pisces is the mutable water. But you see, they're all kind of connected by water, right? In the case of squares and oppositions, Cancer is opposition to Capricorn. Cancer is squared to, 90-degree relationship from Cancer to Aries or Cancer to Libra. They all belong to the cardinal signs. So they all share the same mode, but are different elements. And when you share the same mode and have different elements, it generally creates conflict. It's kind of like a certain element of tension. Cancer is very much a homebody, and sort of inward, emotional. And you think of, square to Aries or Libra, those are more, fire or air or masculine signs. Outgoing, Aries tends to be very competitive. I mean, you can see the conflict there. Cancers hide in their shell. Aries go out and battle for the things they want in life. Libra may be less conflicting with Cancer. Libra is about relationships. Libra, you put Libra and Cancer together. Libra might wonder why Cancer spends so much time hiding in its shell when they want to have, communicate back and forth and that sort of thing. So, I mean, when you look at the squares and the oppositions, you can see the tension. It's real palpable. So when you see a planet that's squared each other, for example, in this particular chart, you have Mars, which I'm showing here in Leo, squared, this red line here, with Neptune in Scorpio. So there's definitely a conflict there between Leo and Scorpio. Leo is very much about self-expression and being recognized, and Scorpio is very secretive, and doesn't advertise itself. So in this particular case, you see Neptune, which is the planet of imagination, the unconscious, is that likes to keep secretive, and then Mars, which is about kind of this outwardly assertive self-expression, wanting recognition. So there's a kind of a tension there that you can see very clearly, because they're both fixed signs, but they're different elements. It's basically Leo is fire and the Scorpio is water, and that makes that those two elements push create tension with each other. So you can see that. But then you look at the Mars here with in Leo with the Moon and Saturn that's in Aries, and they both share a fire element, and so you see this blue kind of aspect line signifying the trine. And so all these being fire, they all kind of speak the same language. So there's a certain, Aries is kind of a competitive, assertive force. Leo is sort of a magnanimous, self-expressive, recognition-seeking, creative, outgoing. Both those forces are outgoing. So, yeah, they're going to have an easier time with each other. Okay, so we looked at the major relationships. Aside from that, like you see in here, there's another pretty easygoing aspect, which is with the Sun, Pluto, Jupiter. All these are sort of in a stellium, conjunct each other, and then you see this other blue line that goes to Neptune. And so these are in the Earth sign of Virgo, and that's Earth. And then Neptune's in water. And Earth and water are harmonious elements with each other. That would form a sextile. They're not the same element, so they don't speak the exact same language as in these fire signs of Mars and Moon and Saturn. They're all on fire. Instead, you have Earth and water, which together make a kind of fertile combination. Generally, water and earth signs tend to get along with each other, typically, depending what else is going on in the chart. Earth is very practical, water is very emotional. So earth, when you add water to it, gives it some life, gives it some liquidy, fertility. Otherwise, it becomes earth signs very dry and practical. And so it needs that kind of emotional energy to kind of make it come alive. And then the water signs are sort of, emotional and somewhat chaotic. So they need the earth to sort of give it structure. They like the structure that Earth provides. Water people like to be around Earth people because there's a certain consistency and it gives them some feeling of security. Whereas Earth people like to be around water people because they loosen them up, so they're not so rigid. And it's similar with fire and air. Fire and air are compatible elements. In this particular chart, air is not really represented much, except here in Libra it is. So that can feed the fire, because air is intellect, ideas, and fire is courage, dynamic action, energy. And so those two kind of feed off each other. They're both masculine elements, similar to how earth and water feed off of each other. So then let's return back to the Inconjunct and the Quincunx. So when you see this kind of cockeyed relationship, it's kind of, what could I say? It's kind of mysterious. Like, how did this relate? It's not an opposition. It's not a direct opposition where there's kind of push or pull. There's not this 90-degree tension that you get with the squares. It's that the opposite sign, it's neighbors to the opposite. So this Moon and Saturn in Aries is sort of cockeyed to Scorpio. Now, here's one thing I want to bring up in this particular chart, is that Aries and Scorpio share a common ruler, which is Mars. Scorpio's primary ruler in contemporary astrology is Pluto, but it also has a secondary ruler of Mars. So when you see planets in Aries and Pluto, they share that same ruler. So these are all going to be very much influenced by Mars over here. That's their rulings, their unifying ruling planet. So they are connected in that way. So it's not a totally strange relationship that you have between these signs. Now, what is a little stranger is these signs with Pluto and Leo. Pluto and the Sun, because that's in Virgo and Aries. So they don't share a common ruler as much. And so let's look at those kind of energies. The Aries, and remember, this is on the cusp. So it's a little bit. So even though this Moon and Saturn are in Aries, they're kind of approaching Taurus as well. And they have, particularly the Moon. The Moon here is right on the 27th degree. So going into Taurus. So if you look at the Moon here in this aspect grid, you can see it has a definite quincunx or inconjunct to Uranus here. So, but not so much to Pluto down here. You have the Pluto here more in conjunct to Saturn, because they're just a little bit off. They're just a few degrees off. So, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to see what is actually, in conjunct or not. You just have to look at this aspect grid, and it makes it more noticeable. Anyways, okay, what was I saying here? So you have these planets in the sign of Virgo having this kind of cockeyed relationship with these ones in Aries. And you think about Virgo. Virgo is very analytical, practical, service-oriented. Left brain kind of dissecting problems, troubleshooting, day-to-day routines. And then you think of Aries as the battering ram, the challenger, the assertive, competitive energy. And these planets are kind of on the cusp of Taurus too. And this Uranus here is on the cusp of Libra. So, Uranus in Libra, And this moon close to Taurus, that's actually a similar energy because both Libra and Taurus are ruled by Venus. So on this side, the moon and Uranus have this kind of Venus connection. So that's not so unusual. So even though they're kind of a cockeyed relationship, they're connected by the ruler. So when you look at these two inconjuncts, there's a Mars connection and a Venus connection. A Mars connection on this side between Saturn and Neptune, and then a Venus relationship from Uranus to the moon. And then the moon and Saturn are conjunct each other, so they're kind of merged each other. So what you really see here is you see this fusion of kind of masculine and feminine energy, masculine aggressive energy, and feminine receptive aesthetic energy, more pleasing, subduing, versus this like go get 'em challenger kind of thing. So you see this kind of fusion coming into play here. And I think that's really interesting when you see that. And so the two of these quincunxes and inconjuncts together form what's called a yod. And that's a finger of God. And, it's a very mysterious, very, very mysterious aspect. You at least need three or more planets to create a yod. So we have Neptune here, we have Uranus. There's two inconjuncts here, but you can kind of fuse them into one and just say kind of these are all these planets are clustered together: Uranus, Sun, Pluto, Jupiter. So that's kind of quincunx up to Moon and Saturn, and then that's inconjunct to Neptune, and then these planets to Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, the Sun, have a sextile. So there's 250-degree aspects here on both sides, and then they're connected with the sextile. And so that creates a yod. It's sort of like two kind of mysterious, baffling aspects that create this symmetry somehow, like this kind of mysterious alchemy. Like I said, with the trines, the sextiles, it's easy to see how they blend together. With the squares and the oppositions, you can see the tension, the 90-degree push and pull, the friction. But with inconjuncts, it's like this, huh? It's like, you have a kind of like, what is that? Who are you over there? I recognize my neighbor across the way, but then there's a guy next to the neighbor, and I don't totally know him. I don't know the neighbor next to him, but I know the person right across from me where I live, in my street. So it has this more mysterious kind of unusual strangeness, like you don't totally connect with that person. Makes me think of the Seinfeld episode where they go into Bizarro World, and there's like mirror images of themselves, but they're different. So it's like there's an awkward oddness to the inconjunct. But when you have the yod, where it forms that double inconjunct, it almost has a sort of sublime feeling to it, like a certain power to it in its unusualness. And I think it's like somehow balanced out in some ways. So this is a kind of person that, I just don't really have any other way of describing it. Inconjuncts are not easy to wrap your head around, which is why I'm doing a video on it. So anyways, how do we summarize this? How do we look at this sort of chart, and how do we make sense of it? And how do we talk to somebody else about it who we're doing a reading for? Whenever you discuss an inconjunct or a quincunx, it's like, well, how do I describe this person? Because the nature of the relationship itself is kind of baffling. That's kind of inherent in its characteristics and its traits. it creates strangeness. And what do? You just tell your client, oh, well, there's this kind of strange element to you. Now, in this particular person's chart, both quincunxes are connected, one side with Mars and the other side with Venus. So that kind of has a symmetry there of Mars and Venus, sort of the two primal sexual energies, the female sexual and the masculine sexual, kind of comes together under this Moon Saturn conjunct in Aries. That's conjunct also the 11th house. So that's really interesting, that it's conjunct the 11th house. So, which the 11th house is kind of an odd house in itself. It's about community, new ideas, freedom, liberation, but also some sense of structure, sort of, so this kind of person there, the moon being emotions, Saturn representing kind of structure, ambition, goals, successes. This is a person who works hard on understanding their happiness and well-being. It's someone that's trying to understand both their masculine and feminine side of their personalities. This would be a person who's very interested in relationships and dynamics between the sexes and sort of internalizing that to some degree and finding unusual friends and people that sort of show them this stuff. So yeah, I just say sometimes it's really good in a chart to allow there to be mystery. And where there's there's a certain element of mystery, a certain thing you just can't pin down quality about them. And when I look at this chart, I definitely see that. I see a sort of a person who's exploring on an emotional level the dynamics between the sexes, and you see this Neptune in the 5th house in Scorpio. So there's definitely kind of a sensitive, creative connection, trying to understand children maybe. And then this huge stellium, Jupiter, Sun, Pluto, Uranus, all in Virgo. Okay, so there's this and Pluto's in there too, so that kind of supercharges it, but puts an element of intensity to the study or analysis of things. Conjunct the 4th house, or the imum coli, right? So that's the home, that's your roots, your personal. So there's this very much a need to understand, to analyze personal roots, family, home, to understand these things. All of it points to this moon here that has if you look in the chart, just the whole layout here, you have everything in this lower sector, this lower hemisphere, which is the hemisphere of personal life. And then up here is the hemisphere of the public sphere, of career and interacting in the public. And so interacting with others and in the public, you have this moon up here, which is about emotions and understanding psychology and in the personal life. And yet there's all this influence on a personal life down here. So, I'm kind of just painting sort of vague strokes as to what's going on. I think it's important. Sometimes you can just say things in a real clear manner about a chart, but other times you sort of describe a chart in poetic terms and sort of let the other client sort of fill in the details of it. And so you just kind of throw out like your impressions of it. Now, where I would put structure into a reading is I really focus on the North Node, what they're trying to learn in this life. Very much more, this North Node is not conjunct the moon in Saturn, because if you notice, the moon and Saturn are kind of on the cusp here of Mars and Taurus. So that is more a blending of a masculine Aries and feminine Venus, but the North Node is definitely farther into the Aries sign, so more of a focus on the masculine drive, asserting one's need, more, not so much on this 11th house cusp, but more into the 10th house, which is career and social status and achievements, goals, ambitions, that this is important for this person. Now, if you look at their South Node, they have all these conjunctions with Venus and in its rulership and Mercury in Libra. So when you have planets conjunct the South Node, it means in this life they're not quite ready to make the leap over to the North Node, the things that they're going to learn. So in this case, there's more of a kind of a focus on the past and things passed down through the family, or in some people look at it through past lives, of being very much into relationships and thinking about others over themselves, rather, and over time, maybe either in this life or the next one, or whatever comes down the road, that they will eventually, she will be kind of in a position to more think about, asserting her own needs, making herself more important over others, instead of always thinking about others and thinking about being pleasing to others, a people pleaser. But it's kind of, as you see, it's separate from this conjunction over here that's kind of a mixture of both. It's on this cusp of the Taurus and the Aries, which is, so it's more towards the Aries. It's more towards me first, my ambitions, my challenges, my goals, trying to obtain a certain position in society, as opposed to being more homebound. But there's so many planets conjunct the IC, so this is very much a person who spends time at home, through intense contemplation, friends and everything. The home has a lot of energy there, a lot of focus there. That, and then there's also this here which is conjunct the 11th house of friends. So, not so much, in the area of career or the area of higher education and travel, those particular areas, it's kind of got these empty spots. Now, it's not saying they're not, it's not saying, because they're empty, it doesn't mean that there's nothing there. What it means, you take the 9th house ruler, if you look at the 9th house, this cusp, it's in Aquarius, so the 9th house is ruled by Uranus, which is, again, attached to the home. So there is a sense of travel and higher education, but it's something that she would do through her own explorations at home. All these things point, Saturn, which is the 7th house, again points to friendships. So there might be more of a kind of an independent, more detached relationship to a friend, in terms of romantic relationships and things like that. So interesting. Saturn rules the cusp, the descendant are for the Capricorn, and Moon rules the ascendant. So that's the chart ruler. So this very much has to do with herself, which is also Aries, Mars, asserting yourself, and relationships, which is this Venus ruled planet. So this being on the cusp here, it's both balancing and merging together her own internal desires, her own needs, things she wants, and then thinking of others too. So yeah, anyways, I'm just kind of describing it in sort of vague general terms, because that's really all you can do with an inconjunct. That's the relationship where you kind of like are not totally sure. It's not like I'm looking directly at you. You're over there, I'm over here. I'm kind of looking cockeyed at like you're over there. Like, who are you? Who are you? You're somewhat mysterious to me, and that's what I get in the angles that I see here. And then when you get like, okay, I'm looking at you from this angle, and I'm looking at you from this angle, that's a yod. And that's where you really kind of penetrate the mystery, and where you feel this sort of sublime energy. The yod is the finger of God. Ooh. So it points down there. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this gave you some insights into this kind of baffling aspect called the inconjunct. And there'll be more coming soon about different topics. And so this was for one of the students who wanted to know more about inconjuncts. I think she also had another thing though about inconjunct. Oh, okay. I want to bring up another topic here. Mars. If you look at Mars here, I just realized I missed something. In the midheaven, have an inconjunct as well. Now, what does that mean? I look at the angles, the houses, the moon. Okay, the living parts of the chart to me are the planets. It's Moon, Saturn, Mars, the Sun. Those are living. So when I look at aspects, like all the different aspects, inconjuncts, trines, sextiles, squares, I only really apply those to the planets, to the astrological celestial bodies. House cusp, the midheaven, these are the angles, the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, imam coli, or nadir. These are the angles. To me, those are pointers. The midheaven points up, the nadir points down, ascendant points to the eastern horizon where the planets ascend, the descendant points. So they're pointers. So they're not really fully fleshed out alive beings to me. So when I look at an inconjunct, I'm not saying there isn't significance to a Mars being in conjunct the midheaven. I just don't put a lot of emphasis on that. I see Mars as living, and that there's relationships between, for example, Mars and the moon, or Mars and Neptune. They relate to each other. But I would only count Mars, I only see the significance if, Mars, what it's, in terms of the non-living, the signposts, the pointers, I only look at conjunctions with that. For example, Mars is conjunct the third house cusp. So that to me is significant. I see Mars as being in or transitioning into the third house. I wouldn't see Mars as a second house. So Mars has more to do with communication, ideas, and that sort of thing. In terms of Mars's relationship to the midheaven, this is just a pointer. So I don't really look at that connection that much. So I hope that answers that part of it, because I know that was something she wanted me to talk about. And that's why I just like to simplify stuff. As you notice in this printout, I use the classical printout for the chart, meaning there's no Chiron. I don't add any asteroids. I'm not saying it's bad if you do, but I get such a nice visual here when I just have just a few of these, when I just have the big 10, Sun, Mercury, Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. I just have those, and then the nodes. Notice I don't have aspects lines to the nodes. It gives me a very clear picture here of this yod. And to me, almost like a tetrahedron. And so if I had a whole bunch of stuff and a whole bunch of aspect lines and everything, I couldn't see this beautiful shape here. And to me, this is the key shape. If I had a whole bunch of stuff in here, I showed aspect lines to all the angles or to all the nodes, those are just fingers. They're just signposts, and then I wouldn't be able to see this as clearly. So that's my attitude. That's why I don't dive into those aspect lines and those aspects as much, because I like a chart that's clean, because then the more powerful shapes are right there, and I can just kind of zoom in on those. I'm not saying asteroids can't be very useful, or these other things don't have amazing things to show you, but I start off with a kind of a simple palette, then I might add an asteroid, or I might add something else there to give it some depth. But other than that, I just, I like to keep it simple. I like to keep it uncluttered, just so the big stuff stands out. Anyways, I hope that helped explain a lot of things about inconjuncts, kind of what they are. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much. Let me see here.